Welcome to this Pandemic Response Day Fireside Chat. My name is Mike Ord, and I'm the Global Head of Thought Leadership, Life Sciences and Healthcare at Clarivate, a global leader in providing solutions to accelerate the life cycle of innovation. It's with great pleasure that I'm joined by Sean Marett, Chief Business and Chief Commercial Officer at BioNTech, the German biotech that has been in the vanguard of COVID-19 vaccine development and delivery. So, Sean, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks, Mike.
So there is an opportunity for people in the audience to ask questions. So if you've got any questions that you'd like to post to Sean, just drop them in the chat box. So, Sean, we all know the important role that BioNTech has actually had in responding to the pandemic. But actually, before we dive into that experience, it would be interesting to know what, in the autumn of 2019, the company was actually originally planning to accomplish in 2020.
So in the autumn, of course, of 2019, we just completed our IPO on the NASDAQ, and that in itself was quite an experience because we launched the deal at the lowest point of the NASDAQ Biotech Index for the year. It hit the bottom, so it was quite tough going. So we were recovering that, but we're still very focused on oncology and bringing our pipeline forward into more advanced testing from preclinic, but also from phase 1 into phase 2.
Yeah. So at what point did you and your colleagues think that actually you should pivot and start focusing on COVID-19? And how did that conversation sort of, at board level evolve?
Yeah, so it was the third week of January. I remember it was Wednesday. We had our weekly board meeting. My colleague Igor said, "I've read Lancet paper. That stuff that's going on in Wuhan is going to be a global problem." And he said, "I've done the maths," and my colleague's a mathematician as well as an oncologist, and he said, "It's going to hit us, and it's going to hit us pretty hard." So we have the opportunity to, with the mRNA vaccine approach that we're taking with the oncology, to also use it for a COVID-19 vaccine. And that day we decided, let's go for it, and we did, and we turned the company to focus on COVID.
So I mean, there was a sort of a discussion. I mean, sort of in terms of resources, etc. You just sort of said, we're going to do what it takes. Is that how it worked out?
Really was. It really was that. We said that we estimated we could make constructs very, very quickly because we of course had been doing that in the clinic for clinical trials since 2012, 13, and so we were able to very quickly develop that. Of course, we thought about if we're successful, how are we going to scale up? How are we going to distribute globally? And we had a flu agreement with collaboration with Pfizer, and they were the obvious choice to speak to about whether they would be interested in joining us. And they expressed immediate interest to do that.
Okay, so you had that sort of, in the third week of January, you had the board meeting where you decided that you were going to pursue the development of a potential COVID-19 vaccine. But at what point was the rather than it being sort of conceptual and it's something that you might be able to do, what was the sort of the data or the sort of the event which actually convinced you that you've actually got something here that actually could be potentially meaningful?
Yeah, so we didn't really have data that truly convinced us until the human data in phase 1, phase 2 in July. where we saw good immunological signals. And if you recall, we took an unusual approach in that we took a number of clinical candidates into the clinic in parallel. So we had 4 clinical trials running in parallel, and were able to discard one, look at directly compared 2 approaches, and continue to develop the remaining approach. And I think it was really when we saw the immunological data compared to antibodies from sera of people who'd had COVID, that was quite convincing for us to go into then a very large-scale trial.
Yeah, and you mentioned Pfizer, and you also sort of mentioned that you already had a flu program with Pfizer. So, at which point did somebody pick up the phone? And it'd be interesting to find out actually who picked up the phone to who. At what point did somebody pick up the phone and sort of saying, "Let's talk about scaling this program up"?
Yeah, so I think it was in early March that we started seriously talking to Pfizer. We asked them. We said, "We're doing this. Do you want to be part of it?" And very quickly, actually, Katrin Jansen, who runs R&D for vaccines, spoke to her colleagues on the board, and they decided, "Yeah, let's go for it. Let's do it too." And we did I don't know, for those who are lucky enough to negotiate with large pharmaceutical companies, and for those larger pharmaceutical companies who are lucky enough to negotiate with biotech, everyone knows how long it takes to negotiate a deal. It typically can be 6 to 9 months. We did it in 3 weeks. We were in the clinic from our decision to going into the clinic within 3 months. So from concept to clinic in 3 months, it was a really quick project. We didn't have any idea. We didn't have any idea what the costs of goods were. We had no idea whether we could scale the product. It was the first on everything, and that was one of the great things about the partnership, is that we could leverage the knowledge of Pfizer, and they could with us, and it worked really well to be able to do things really, really rapidly. And a testament to Pfizer, they can move really quickly. They can really be fast. They can be as fast as a biotech.
Yeah. So what do you think? What was done differently to actually, put that pace into that discussion and signing term sheets, etc.
Yeah, doing everything in parallel. So we started the collaboration with a letter of memorandum of understanding, but without any contract or any real terms, and then we just ran everything in parallel. And it was the same with the scale up. Normally, you do everything sequentially from a risk management point of view. We just did everything in parallel.
Right. And so there's this memorandum of understanding, which obviously then has evolved into some sort of divvying up of responsibilities. Could you sort of just describe what you and Pfizer have actually done in the creation, the development, and the ultimate delivery of the vaccine, and how those responsibilities are?
Yeah, so a lot of it actually is mutual decision making, and that was a cornerstone of the deal for us as a biotech. As we've talked about several times, and we've always had our eye on commercializing our own products, and so some of the things we agreed reflected that. So, for example, we're the marketing authorization holder in Europe, United States, Canada, United Kingdom, and we have several territories where we're responsible for commercialization and built a commercial group. This is all part of our agreement. Decision making has been set up to be largely mutual, and it works really well. I mean, I have to say that we've done many partnerships over the years, and this one, because we were, both parties had never done this before, we really grew together, and it's been a fantastic relationship. I really can't emphasize that enough.
Well, and I mean, your role is Chief Commercial Officer, so I guess you have the responsibility for developing that sort of commercialization approach.
Yeah.
Where were you before this? I mean, did you actually have any commercial infrastructure in place?
No, we built it all. We built it all in 3.5 months.
And were you anticipating doing it this year, or?
No, we plan to do it. We plan to do it in the middle of the decade, or actually earlier in the middle of the decade for pre-preparation for go-to-market for oncology. So we had to. It was a bit like our manufacturing. We had clinical scale manufacturing. We suddenly had to go to billions of doses and scale up. We had no commercial capability. We had to build it. We had to build all of the ancillary elements that are ordinary course of business, but still need to be built, like pharmacovigilance. We had to build that internally. All of the things that you have at a clinical scale, we had to scale up globally.
Right. And Pfizer's role, I mean, presumably, where are they?
Pfizer have tremendous, of course, infrastructure, and so we could plug into that. So I gave you the example of pharmacovigilance. I mean, the pharmacovigilance system of Pfizer is second to none, and we were able to tap into that whilst, building our own for the countries which we were responsible for. And of course, from a commercialization distribution point of view, Pfizer is an existing manufacturer, so in the vaccine space, so that helped a lot for negotiations with countries where we simply have no presence or contacts. And again, on the manufacturing side, we bought a factory from Novartis in a period of 6 weeks in the summer, but we didn't have global manufacturing. Pfizer, of course, does have a global footprint. So there was a lot of ability to leverage the assets of Pfizer, but also to build at the same time in parallel our own with our greater strategy in mind, which is, of course, to commercialize our own products.
Yeah, which is sort of said was been accelerated forwards in terms of where you plan to be, and presumably also in sort of negotiations or discussions with the regulators, because that must have been also a new experience for BioNTech. So
absolutely.
How did you sort of tackle or approach that, and what surprised you about that process?
Yeah, so we followed the normal rules of submission in the sense of data. Of course, when we submitted emergency use authorization in the United States, in the UK under a special rule, which is a temporary license in the UK. In Europe, it's a conditional full license. All of these data sets were the same, with the exception of long-term safety data. That's what we did not have. And everyone recognized that. I think the regulators, like governments, like everyone else who worked on this project, became extremely flexible in their approach, given the pandemic situation that we found ourselves in.
Right. And was that the sort of the most surprising thing? I'm just sort of, because everything was done sort of, at such pace. I'm just trying to, you mentioned how things were done in parallel, but did you sleep at all?
No, and we still don't. I mean, that's one of the, of course, that's one of the things that you've been running for a year on full power, and all of us have. I mean, all of us, regulators, governments in this area, BioNTech ourselves, and Pfizer. And it has been incredibly intense. But I have to say, in all the years I've been doing this, I have never experienced the cooperation I've seen between governments, regulators, and pharma. I've never seen it before. It was really, really strong.
Right. So that's interesting. So if we sort of look at sort of the pace and the agility of the various partners that was there with COVID-19 vaccine development, could that approach, that philosophy, is that something that could be replicated for the developing treatments for other diseases?
I don't see why not. There's no reason at all why you can't run things in parallel. Whether you wish to, from a risk perspective, is another question. For us with the COVID, then there was absolutely no choice. We had to do it. For other assets, you may take a different risk assessment and come to a different conclusion. But I think what we've learned from this is that there are most certainly ways to get products approved much quicker. Don't forget that normally in a vaccine life cycle, prophylactic life cycle, we're talking about a 12 to 14 year development cycle before you reach the market. Here was less than one. And I think that there are definitely lessons that we can learn to speed things up for sure.
Yeah. But as you mentioned, the fact if you've all been working at sort of breakneck speed, that is something that isn't necessarily easy to sustain.
No, that's right. You do need to of course recognize that of course you can't work at this pace forever, but nonetheless this has opened the path to being able to, in my view, allow acceleration if you so want it. And I would say that we're not a company that has ever shied away from rapid growth, as you know, and so this poses some exciting opportunities for us going forward.
Yeah. So how clearly a huge amount of effort and resource, brain power was diverted to COVID-19. How has the other work that was going on at BioNTech, how has that been impacted during the past year?
Yeah, so I mean, we did put a task force on COVID, but we didn't stop our oncology program. So a number of them did progress. Some of them actually, 2 to 3 of them, were impacted by COVID in that the recruitment rates decreased as people didn't come to enroll in the clinical trials. But we continue to make progress on the oncology front and continue to do so this year. We had some very good or highly promising, in our view, initial early clinical data with GenMab in November last year for the next gen checkpoint inhibitors, which was very exciting for us. And we're in the clinic now with a very novel approach for one of our programs, which is very exciting for us.
Yeah, but I mean, have you been able to sort of initiate new sort of discussions with potential partners, or has everything just been focused on just?
No, we have run the oncology in parallel, and as I say, we've been bringing programs into the clinic last year and this year, and we'll continue to do that. It's not exclusive. I think we've got an oncology team, but also 2 global CROs that are our execution arm for the clinic. So, once we get ethics and regulatory approval to go into the clinic, it's that part of the business is not affected in the execution. So I think, for us, of course, running a 44,000 odd patient COVID, or person in this case COVID trial, we were able to use Pfizer's capabilities here to do that. And again, that didn't, because Pfizer did a lot of the heavy lifting there in the multiple countries, and we did over six countries at the same time in clinical testing. Again, that didn't disturb our oncology. So we were able to drive our oncology pipeline forward. However, like many other oncology companies, some of the programs suffered just because of COVID, because people were not willing to enroll.
Yeah. So, looking forward, how long do you think BioNTech is going to be focused on COVID-19? I mean, is this, now that you've got a vaccine, it's a done deal? I mean, we've got variants, etc. But in your business planning, how long do you sort of see that this is going to be a challenge for that BioNTech has to tackle?
I mean, I think COVID will be here to stay for a good while yet, and it will be in the environment. So the question that we're trying to address at the moment is, how long does the initial immunization last? And do you need a booster at some point? And so that's what we're addressing currently in our latest clinical trials. So I think that will continue to be an area we'll be working on. But the oncology, as I say, has been and remains a core of our business, and we will continue to drive that. And I don't want to give the impression that we have not focused on the oncology in the last 12 months. It's not the case, and we will continue to drive that. Don't forget, we've been rapidly expanding the company, and so in that time attracted new talent to be able to further support our oncology as well, and that's been a strategy of ours to do that.
Right. And I guess there's some benefit, the fact that now mRNA has actually been put into patients and actually been seen to do some help. Do you sort of envisage that's going to sort of help the development of oncology mRNA medicines?
Absolutely. I mean, we have a pathway to the market. I mean, the CMC section, which is the manufacturing section, it is now known to the regulators, and so producing another mRNA vaccine addressing this time therapeutic applications, oncology, will not be foreign to the regulators, and they've got to know us as people, and that helps too. So I think that's definitely a case for supporting the oncology. But also, I mean, in the infectious disease, the fact that we have this infrastructure now allows us to look at other prophylactic infectious disease opportunities.
Yeah. So, of course, and you mentioned the fact, COVID-19 is here to stay. Flu is with us all the time. You've had these sort of these programs with Pfizer. Have you had any discussions with Pfizer about the possibility of combining a COVID-19 with the flu vaccine?
I mean, that's of course an obvious product life cycle management approach. We will see how we do that.
Right.
That's still something that we need to consider.
Okay, so what's currently keeping you busy, and what sort of news flow can we expect from BioNTech over the next year or so?
Yeah, so the news flow will continue to be in the oncology from a clinical development point of view, and from of course, people are very interested to know what revenues we've generated and what cash flow we can expect from our proportion of the proceeds from the COVID-19 vaccine that we have agreed with our colleagues at Pfizer. And I think that will still be also something that people will be asking about. But this will be a year for us of bringing our oncology pipeline forward. And we've got some, as I said, some exciting programs in the clinic already. And we'll be reporting further on those at the end of March at our quarterly call.
Yeah. So, I mean, just sort of, talking about, the fact that there will be revenues that have been generated from this. Does that mean that you don't anticipate going back to the market because you're going to have enough financial firepower to actually achieve your ambitions?
Well, I think that we are looking at all options, Mike, as to how we address the long-term needs of the company. This is always about how we develop the company long-term. And so we'll be considering the vaccine cash generation plus our oncology needs and our further expansion all to see, how much we need and are we covered by the COVID cash flows.
Yeah. Okay. So Sean, on behalf of us all, I'd like to congratulate you and your colleagues for everything you've done in tackling the pandemic, and I'd like you to thank you for sharing your thoughts with us today. So, as always, it was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you, Sean.
It's a pleasure talking to you, Mike. Thanks a lot. Bye then.